So, lesson 42, the mid-18th century wars. Wars in the mid-18th century were fought by professional armies, limiting the effects on civilians. Peace often was viewed as a time to prepare for the next war. And there were two areas of European rivalry: overseas empires, and then rivalry over Central and Eastern Europe. Conflict in one of these areas could spill over to a large war with many nations. So the first war we'll get to is the War of Jenkins Ear. Spanish patrols in the West Indies were active in trying to stop smuggling, and they cut off Bob Jenkins Ear in 1731. To give you a little backstory on this, what had happened is the British had been given the asiento, basically permission by the Spanish to sell slaves in the West Indies. You know, because of all the politicking going on, jockeying around in the wars they've been fighting for some time. And at a certain point, I think it was 1729, the British had given the Spanish the right to board those ships and make sure that they weren't smuggling anything they weren't supposed to smuggle in or anything like that. Well, in 1731, the Spanish patrol stopped Bob Jenkins' ship, and he apparently is none too polite to them, so they cut his ear off. So he puts his ear in a jar of brandy to preserve it, and in 1738 he's called up to speak to Parliament. This should tell you something. If, as this next line points out, if he's been called to Parliament to tell his story about the Spanish cutting his ear off, there's got to be a bigger picture issue. Parliament doesn't get around and have an interview with one guy who had a bad thing happen to him. You know, that's just not how it works. So British merchants and planters already wanted English intervention. They wanted to basically be able to trade more in the West Indies, and frankly, some of them were smuggling and wanted to be able to smuggle more effectively. So Britain will declare war with Spain, because what will happen is these British merchants and planters, with all this going on, one of the things they've gotten the government to do is to get rid of this agreement that lets the Spanish board their ships. So the Spanish say, okay, then we get rid of the asiento. You don't get to trade in the West Indies anymore. And this is going to lead to war. Britain declares war with Spain. It's basically a trade war over the West Indies. And it's going to open up a series of wars, and it's going to get subsumed, swallowed up by the War of Austrian Succession. Now, another interesting thing about the War of Jenkins Ear is that the admiral who leads the British is Admiral Vernon, and a relative of George Washington's serves under Admiral Vernon, and that's why Mount Vernon, George Washington's home, is named Mount Vernon. So there is a connection between George Washington and this guy who lost his ear. You know, so losing body parts apparently is a big theme with George Washington, right? Because he had his false teeth going on and everything. Although he didn't really have wooden teeth. That would be silly. Wooden teeth would absorb your saliva and get all mushy and messed up. That wouldn't work. Okay, so this is going to move into the War of the Austrian Succession. A new king for the Prussians, Frederick II, will invade Silesia, which is an Austrian territory. This will shatter the Pragmatic Sanction we talked about before. Remember, the Austrian king, his only heir is his daughter. In Austria, there was not a tradition of women rulers, so he got everybody to agree, foreign leaders as well as people within his empire, to the Pragmatic Sanction that would allow Maria Theresa to rule. When Frederick II becomes king, he ignores the Pragmatic Sanction. He goes into Silesia. This is going to mess up the balance of power politics that have been going on since at least before Elizabeth I's time. So Maria Theresa's accomplishment will be preserving the Habsburg Empire. Not making it stronger. It's actually going to get weaker, but she keeps it together. She avoids imperial collapse and revolts by weakening central authority. How does she weaken central authority? She grants new privileges to the nobility. So the nobility back her and support her militarily against Prussian threat, but in return they want more autonomy, more independence from her ability to tell them what to do. She recognizes Hungary as the most important of her crowns. Hungarian nobility, the Magyar nobility, are given a lot more independence, more autonomy, and this is going to be the case whenever the empire is weak. The Magyar nobles get to exercise this independence, and when the empire is strong, then the empire tries to ignore these grants that they gave. And then we get into France drawing Great Britain into the war. So you have this War of Austrian Succession going on. Well, the French minister, Cardinal Fleury, it gets convinced to support Prussia. And this is going to strengthen Prussia, which it's incredibly kind of goofy that Fleury would do this, because what's going to happen is Prussia is later on going to be a huge threat to France. In fact, eventually this is going to lead to a crowning of the Prussian king as the Kaiser of Germany in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles when they beat the French in the Franco-Prussian War. So this is really a big mistake on the part of the French to support the Prussians down the road, long term. Britain joins in to prevent France or Prussia from gaining the Netherlands. Remember, Austria at this point controls the Austrian Netherlands, and which had been the Spanish Netherlands, the southern portion of the Netherlands. And Britain is concerned because if France and Prussia are pressing Austria, the last thing Britain wants is for France to get all of the Dutch territories, or the Prussians to get it either. They like the way things are because they are able to trade quite effectively in the Netherlands at this point. France in 1744 will support Spain in the New World, and this will divide French power. So now you've got the Jenkins Ear War and the War of Austrian Succession getting mixed together. France gets involved in both sides of it, and this is going to weaken them because they're trying to do things in North America and they're trying to do things on the continent. And they don't have the kind of navy that the British have, which allows the British to strike more places at once. So you have a stalemate, and you have the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748. If you're interested, Aix-la-Chapelle is the city that once was the ancient capital for the Empire of Charlemagne. Prussia was able to keep Silesia, so they invaded and took Silesia from Austria. And so we say this was a stalemate, but in reality it was a loss for the Austrians, because after all they lost territory. Britain still gets to import slaves to Spanish colonies, so Britain is happy. And then we get to the diplomatic revolution of 1756. France and Britain are still rivals over the Ohio River Valley in upper New England, but there's going to be a shift in alliances as far as who they're allied with on the continent. George II, who is King of England, he also controls Hanover in Germany, will switch alliances and ally with Prussia instead of Austria in order to protect Hanover. Important thing to understand is George I is from the Hanover line, and he doesn't even speak English. So this is his son, who is this, German/English king. He's king of England, but he doesn't speak the best English in the world, and he's still, a lot of his politics are kind of focused on his territories in Germany. The Prussians saw this as insurance against Austria and Russia to ally with the English, and Maria Theresa has lost her British ally, so now she allies with the French. This is going to lead up to the 7 Years' War. Frederick the Great will get things started. So in August 1756, here he goes again. Frederick II will invade Saxony. He feared a Saxon-Austrian-French alliance, and in the process of doing this, he basically creates the alliance he was worried about. Sweden and Russia will join France and Austria, so this is a pretty large alliance here. France, Austria, and in the north, Sweden, in the east, Russia. Prussia will be saved by British financial aid, and also by the succession of Tsar Peter III. who will make peace with Prussia because he's just really impressed with Frederick the Great and all things Prussian. So you have, this is an interesting name, the Treaty of Huber-Tussberg in 1763. No significant changes happened there. But the 7 Years' War is bigger than just that continental battle. William Pitt, a minister in Britain, has a strategy for winning North America. He supports Prussia to distract the French, but his real focus is on North America. He sends 40,000 English and colonial troops to oust the French in Canada. Okay, and pay attention to the timeline here. We're talking 1756, right? And this is 20 years before the American Revolution. George Washington is an officer fighting for the British in the French and Indian War, which is what the 7 Years' War is called in North America. Okay, so this actually plays into the American Revolution. The French military administration is corrupt. The French commands in Canada are divided, and they could not supply forces because, after all, the British have a much more effective navy than the French do at this point. So in 1759, General Wolfe for the British will defeat General Montcalm on the Plains of Abraham. The French West Indies will fall to the British. French colonial trade will fall by more than 80%. And in India, this is like, the 7 Years' War is kind of global in nature because of how many colonies the British and the French have. So the British and French are also going to fight in India. So in 1757, Robert Clive will defeat French allies at the Battle of Plassey, opening up Bengal and all of India. So he defeats Indian princes who are allied with the French. And this 7 Years' War is a really big deal, guys, because it leads to British ascendancy in North America, which will quickly lead to the rise of America, and this also leads to British ascendancy in India, which is going to be really important as we read the next few chapters as we learn about the British Empire. So what ends the 7 Years' War? The Treaty of Paris in 1763. Britain receives Canada, the Ohio River Valley, and the eastern Mississippi Valley. West of the Mississippi, they don't have that. They return territories in India to French control, Pondicherry and Chandernagore. They also return Guadeloupe and Martinique in the West Indies to France, so they give up some of their gains in West Indies. So the 7 Years' War was a vast conflict. Vast means really big. Tens of thousands of soldiers and sailors were involved. You had major battles around the globe. Prussia became stronger. The Habsburgs became more dependent on Hungary. France no longer was a great colonial power. The Spanish Empire remained. The British gained in North America and India and become truly a world power. And all European powers had to come up with a way to increase revenue to pay for all these wars.